One night, when the moon was covered by clouds, a young man named Max went for a walk in the woods. He liked to walk in silence to calm his restless spirit. But this time was special. He felt as if someone or something was watching him. When he reached the depths of the forest, Max heard a wind noise that was not natural. The sound was like a whisper, and its words were vague but ominous. Max tried to ignore it and continue on his way, but soon he began to see strange silhouettes moving around him. They seemed to appear out of the darkness, but quickly disappeared as soon as he turned his attention to them. Max felt that he was surrounded by creatures from the netherworld. They were invisible, but he felt that they were near. Soon he heard rustles and footsteps behind him, and he turned around to see what it was. He saw something horrible, a creature as tall as a man, with sharp claws and eyes that glowed in the darkness. He tried to run away, but fell to the ground. The creature approached him and began to emit an ominous scream that made Max close his eyes and clasp his ears. When he opened his eyes, the creature had disappeared, and he was alone again in the woods. He realized that it was something otherworldly, and that they would not leave him alone. He was condemned to live in fear and isolation, his whole life, unable to return to the normal world. It became clear to Max that he was trapped in a trap from which there was no way out. Entities from the netherworld became his constant companions, watching his every move and intimidating him with their ominous ghosts. He began to lose his mind, lost weight, and became afraid even of his own shadow. He constantly felt invisible hands pulling him down, forcing him to fight for every breath. He began searching for answers, trying to find a way to get rid of these creatures. He read books about the otherworlds, consulted psychics, and practiced meditation, but it was all in vain. The entities became more and more aggressive and persistent, causing him to experience real terror every night. He began to hear their voices whispering terrible words and promises to him. In the end, Max decided that there was no other way but to say goodbye to life. He wrote a letter to his family, explaining that he could no longer live in this world, and went into the woods to meet his death. No one knows what happened to Max, but many people still claim that you can still hear his screams and the sounds of fighting with otherworldly beings in the woods. He was a victim of their sinister power, and his story reminds us that there are dark forces in this world that we cannot control. Max's death was a shock to many people in his town. Stories of otherworldly beings and their influence on human life began to spread faster than ever before. However, despite all the warnings and cautions, some people did not believe in the existence of the other world and went on with their normal lives. They did not see the signs that indicated that something was wrong, and they did not hear the voices that warned them of danger. One such person was a young girl named Carol. She lived in the same town as Max, and was convinced that everything he said about otherworldly beings was just fiction. One night, Carol decided to take a walk in the woods to get some fresh air and reflect on life. But she didn't notice that she was being followed by the eyes of otherworldly beings who were patiently waiting for their next victim. When Carol entered deep into the woods, she sensed that something was wrong. She heard noises and whispers coming from every direction. She thought she saw flickers of light and shadows moving around her. She began to run, but her heels stiffened in the ground and she could not move. She felt the cold wind penetrate her bones and realized that she was not alone in this forest. The otherworldly beings showed themselves openly before Carol, and she realized that she was their next victim. She closed her eyes and prepared for the worst, but suddenly she heard a voice telling her, "Open your eyes and look at me." Carol opened her eyes and saw an otherworldly being standing in front of her. It was a young man who was also trapped like Max. Carol looked frightened at the young man and asked, "Who are you, and what's going on?" The young man replied, "My name is Jack, and I was trapped here too, just like Max. We were both scared, but Max managed to find a way out while I stayed here. I tried to escape, but they caught me again." Carol realized that she, too, was trapped by otherworldly beings. She asked Jack to help her get out. Jack told her that he had a plan. They must find a source of light and use it to get out of this maze. He knew there was a place in this forest where there was light and where they could find a way out. They began to move together, stepping carefully through the forest and avoiding otherworldly creatures. They heard noises and rustling, but they didn't stop and kept moving forward. Soon they found a light source that was brighter than all the other glowing objects in the forest. They approached it and saw a door that led outside the woods. They quickly ran through the door and out of the woods. Carol was grateful to Jack for his help and was glad they had gotten out of there alive. She realized that otherworldly creatures did exist and that they could be very dangerous. She promised herself that she would never ignore any otherworldly warnings again and would always be careful when she was in the woods. Carol and Jack continued to move on, leaving the woods behind. They were so disturbed by what was happening that they didn't notice that they had already walked several miles and hit an old road. On the road they saw a car and rushed to it, hoping it was still running. To their surprise, the car was functional, and they quickly got into it. They relaxed as the car started moving, but after a few minutes they heard a knock in the trunk. They became uneasy and decided to check out what was going on. Carol opened the trunk and there they saw one of the otherworldly creatures that seemed to be following them. They were frightened and closed the trunk. But it didn't end there. The creature was in the car with them, and they didn't know what to do. They made the decision to drop it, leaving it on the road, but it wasn't as easy as they thought. The creature fought and bit, leaving marks on their bodies until they managed to expel it from the car. They realized that this was not their last encounter with the otherworldly creatures. Carol and Jack eventually made it to the nearest town and told people who knew about the otherworld about their incident. They learned that the forest was known as a place where portals between worlds often occur, and that they had to be careful not to get trapped. Carol and Jack promised themselves that they would never forget the warnings about the otherworld again, and would always be careful in their travels.